Hi, my name's Mary, and I'd like to welcome you tonight to the clinical evening here at Satir Institute of the Pacific. And tonight I'd like to talk about addiction. I'm an addictions counselor down at North Fraser Pretrial Centre out in Port Coquitlam. It's one of the largest remand centres in BC. Fairly busy place, I might add. And I run the addiction services program there. And we're here together tonight to talk about what I do there and how I like to support the guys that come through my program. My program is a cognitive behavioral therapy program, is the framework that I use. And within that framework, I weave in Satir to really make those intrapsychic shifts. Like I say, I use a framework, and one of the frameworks that I use, I created a system called a conscious choice system. And it is up here. And I call it a system because when I work with the client, if we make a shift in any one of these areas, it impacts the other areas and causes a shift as well. So when we look at one thing, it just doesn't affect that one thing. It makes a shift throughout. And the system that I've gotten here, if we compare it or sort of overlay it with the iceberg, there's a lot of continuity between the two of them. And so I really find it quite effective when I'm dealing with the clients, and how I present it to them in a way I think is really important, because when I show them this and I let them know I let them know where we're going to go with this and what's going to help them, they feel much more prepared. Most of the guys have never been in counseling before. They have an image and a stereotype of what a counselor is, and I don't fit that image, so they're much more ready to sit down and talk to me. And so I want to make sure that they're comfortable with what's going on, that they understand with what's going on, and when I lay this out for them and let them know kind of where we're going, it makes them feel a lot more at ease in knowing what they expect. And so when I start out with them, one of the things that we talk about is the values. And I tell them that values generally stay the same. They never change. They may change in priority. Well, that's not true. They may get new values, but most of the time I don't find people having new values. They shift their priorities of those values. With the addicts, we have the beliefs. The beliefs here are the things that change. And these beliefs change very slowly. And it's the belief around the values. And I'll give an example of that. An individual may have the value of family. And the belief around the value of family is I will do anything for my family. They come first. Well, when a family member becomes involved in addiction, the family finds things missing, money's gone, that the person that is part of that family is now stealing from them. So for the family member whose belief from the same family is that family comes first, their belief is starting to shift because I have to steal from my family for my addiction, so my belief starts to get out of control and starts to warp. And it has to morph into something different because there would be so much dissonance between the belief and the value that don't match. They wouldn't be able to bear it. So their belief system has to start to twist to match their lifestyle. And the lifestyle is in a survival mode. And that survival mode, we can tell by their coping skills. So we start to look at what changes in these beliefs. And the coping skills that they're using with these dysfunctional beliefs are the cognitive distortions that we start to learn about. When they start looking at this and we start to go through what beliefs, their perceptions start to change. How they start to see things is going to make a shift. And these perceptions are wrapped around are expectations. What am I expecting? And if their expectations are starting to come in line and we're starting to see with their beliefs, their perceptions change how they see their beliefs. It starts to change how their accountability. And when they start to become accountable, their responding increases. Their reaction goes down. When we ask them and start to work on what their reactions are, also in regard to their expectations, it's something that we look at. We look at their expectations of self, others, and what others think, or what I think others think of what we expect. And so we can start to address those to look at their reactions and there's triggers to that. When they start to see these and start to make new awarenesses, their accountability definitely goes up. Their response goes up. I find that the responses, we can invoke a little more thinking and letting them know that a reaction comes from an emotional part. I always like to call the reaction from your heart and the response from your head. When they start to see any sorts of changes, they're coming to new understandings about the process that they're going in, their motivation also changes. That motivation will shift from short-term goals to long-term goals. And that's huge for them because in the life that they lead when they're out there in survival, the motivation is just, how can I meet my needs today? We don't have time to worry about next week or next month or what's the 5-year plan here? No. It's about what am I going to do immediately. And so we start to work in this framework to try and make some shifts, come to some new awarenesses so that they can start to begin that process of healing. I think one of the major issues that I see when I'm working with my guys is the fact that most of them are pretty reactive, and that reaction, we do a lot of anger management working with that as well. And I think when we get the most reactive individual that likes to depend on anger or power to intimidate, they're the most sensitive. And they're the most sensitive because they don't know what to do with those emotions. They don't know how to deal with discomfort. If it's discomfort they feel, they just want to pop you in. Straight to get the physical. And so in this process, if I'm working with a violent individual or someone who is extremely sensitive, I call them, and it's pretty interesting to see the look on their face when this big burly guy says, oh, you must be sensitive. They just look at you with these big eyes and go, what? Excuse me. So when we start to do that, I like to start to talk about their yearnings. Because some of the latest research, has been 2 strains of research that I'm really interested in, I like to follow. One is the attachment theory on addiction. And this really strongly relates to what getting the yearnings met. So in the attachment theory, when they don't have a secure attachment with their parent, it affects their emotion regulation. And that emotion regulation in my population at NFPC is huge. It's so huge. I would probably say, and I'll be very conservative, to say at least 60% of the guys have emotional regulation issues, which means poor attachment. So a lot of these fellows come from foster cares, parents in a drug family, generational drug families, alcoholism. Probably out here at NFPC, our population of First Nations isn't as great as in some of the other fields. Kamloops has a greater populations of First Nations as well as Kelowna, but we still have quite a large populations of First Nation, and there where the attachment issues is really quite evident with that particular population. So attachment issue is a big one. The other one that is a new one that's really new coming up in addictions is addiction as a brain I was going to say brain injury, but that's not what I'm talking about.
What is it? Well, it's okay, we can edit this part out. So a brain,
brain
like
injury.
it's right there.
The newest research on addiction has shown that there is neurological damage of the brain.
Brain structure, brain.
Yeah,
brain,
it's totally a neurological brain disease. And it's a brain disease because it's wearing out and it's destroying certain parts of the brains, and it's creating those neural pathways that become permanent for that addict. They get engrossed in just the whole pattern of using, the ritual of using, and then along with the actual high in itself, creates these pathways that when the addict tries to start to recover, it gets really difficult because it is a brain disease. It's not just about quitting the substance and then in 3 weeks we're all going to be better. It's not that way, and that's why research has shown that it can take a lifetime to recover from addiction. So with that said, I've got two sort of perspectives, and that if we can teach the inmates on how to secure a healthy attachment, then we can address the deficits of the brain injury that's happened as a result of the drug use.
and forming new neural pathways in the brain. And get those
Realigned. Because they say that it has a really low, when the drug addicts are in active use, they lose the oxytocin that's naturally produced in the brain. And so it takes a long time for that to come back up to normal levels, which is interesting because one of the Federal Females Institute in Abbotsford, the Women's Federal Penitentiary, has a dog training program there. And it scientifically has been proven that when you pet a dog, or even a baby for that matter, it increases your oxytocin levels. And so they've had the dog kennel there for a couple of years, and they're finding that it really helps the female inmates and helps to reproduce some of the natural chemicals that were there before we started our addiction. So getting in touch with the guys and working from an attachment theory perspective really mixes well with the Satir model, because it's really about thinking and feeling and doing congruently. And how do I do that? How do I learn to accept some of the discomfortable emotions that I have? And we work on just identifying and accepting those emotions and saying it's okay. It's okay to feel hurt. It's okay that I feel frustrated. It's okay that I'm fearful. That's it. And they think that it's so simple, they're actually kind of surprised. And I think that's the big thing that really gets them to step into the conversation and really engage in the therapy, because it seems very simple to them and it doesn't seem too much.
I just have a question, or maybe it's a comment, I don't know,
Okay.
about when you were talking about reaction versus response. And you mentioned that reaction from an emotional place and response from a thinking place. And I'm wondering if really it's getting them to respond from their whole iceberg, not just thinking, but like you said, accepting their emotions. And being able to, and when you're not in a coping stance, you're able to respond from a congruent place, from that life energy place.
Yeah, maybe so. They're just not in the emotional part where that's ruling.
The reactive emotions.
Yeah. It's just not ruling them at that moment.
Exactly. They're in charge of themselves.
Yeah, that's a better way to put that, yeah. So the response probably is more of coming through the whole iceberg to recognize how I feel and saying that's okay. That's okay. As long as I acknowledge it, that's okay. I don't need to hit somebody because I feel that way.
I can accept that I have anger, and
And that's okay.
yeah.
You know, and then it's then we break it down to what do I want to do about that?
Exactly.
Is there something I want to do? Do I need to do anything about it? And that's the next step, which is a whole nother chapter inside there. Alright, so that's about all I got.
Okay.
So if there's
So
any
let's play with
questions?
this, yeah. And we're not going to record my questions. I'm just stimulating the conversation. But okay, your conscious choice system, where do you start with them? Like I know you, where do you start? Do you start with values and beliefs?
Where do I start with them? I start by asking them how they got here. How did you get here? This is an introduction when I sit with them to get the ball rolling so that they know what to expect. So that because they've never had an interaction with a counselor, they find it very mysterious and they think that it's just all about them talking and me probing into their personal life as a child or hearing their story. In there, that's the number one. They want to tell me their story of how they got there. And which I had, when I first started, I get stuck into listening to it, but I had a wonderful comment from John Banman that told me to say, I'm more interested in you rather than your story. It works beautifully. It works beautifully. So when I start with them, it is really about asking them how they got there, so I can try and pick out what their coping stance is. And then we talk about cognitive distortions, and then from there, then we kind of leap off into what their expectations are around that, what they would like to see, how do they get their yearnings met out of that, and then so we just start weaving back and forth.
Yeah, because it really is systemic and interactive, intrapsychic, and all of that.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if we can play with something here, because you've shown your conscious choice system, and you've talked about how it overlays with the iceberg. Can we do some overlaying with the iceberg? Like, can we take the iceberg and then talk about how your conscious choice system fits in with the iceberg? Which I know you explained from that diagram. Well, let's do it with the iceberg.
With the iceberg.
Let's play with this.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the coping, with their coping stance, obviously is the behaviors that they do. So when they're coping and in these behaviors is where I can see which cognitive distortions or beliefs,
Which are about perceptions, beliefs.
come from. So if they have the belief, so which is like their core belief, right? And these are going to reinforce what the core belief is, and then how they see it. So are they blaming? Are they in denial? Are they minimizing? And so when we start to talk about that, then I want to know how they're feeling about that. How do you feel that when you blame somebody for something? And then when they tell me that, well then what does it feel like to feel that? How does that work for you?
How do you judge those feelings?
Is it manly?
Yeah.
You know, and that's a big one. And is it cultural? So if I come from a Greek family, I'm not allowed to cry at all. I'm not allowed to say nice things. So we can go there, and then I'll weave into what do they expect from their self or from others, or what is it they think others want from them, and what can we do about what's fact and what's not? What is an assumption? What is a judgment? And how does that feel when you're making that judgment, or you're not getting what it is that you're expecting? How do you feel about that? And does that make you feel good or bad, empowered? What's the feeling around that? And then we just go back and forth, and also at their expectations on how they get these. What are you expecting from the other people? What do you want from them? How do you think you can get that?
So expectations on how to get their yearnings met?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because in addiction and criminal and addictive thinking are overlaid. What they have in common is they want power. One uses power to control, one uses power to deceive. So when they're trying to get their yearnings met, they think that punching somebody else is going to get their yearnings met. They're going to get respect. And they're pretty disappointed when that doesn't happen. Okay, so here is the conscious choice, and once again we had the iceberg here that we compared both of them, and I really think that I can do so much more and just expand on it and make it a little bit richer, which will probably be an evolution in my work with the guys. So I just want to end it here, and really want to thank everybody for listening, and hopefully that you will come for the next clinical evening here at Satir, and we can have some more interesting dialogue and learn some new stuff. Thanks for watching. Bye.